Hello fellow ARCs! Are you guys excited for Line Strike? I sure am. I am really excited to play PSO2's second TCG. Wait a minute, second? That's right. Prior to Line Strike, PSO2 had its own, short-lived, physical card game. I always wondered why the TCG didn't last that long. Most of us outside Japan haven't even had the chance to play it, so I figured it must have simply not been popular enough. After doing some digging, I found a different answer. Join me as we dive deep into this collectible cardboard's history. Before we begin, I need to preface this video by saying that PSO2TCG and Line Strike aren't the same games. Line Strike reuses art from PSO2TCG, but it plays completely differently. Additionally, I won't be talking about the rule set of PSO2TCG in this video, with some relevant exceptions. If you want to read up on how to play the game using printed cards, or Tabletop Simulator, you can do so by visiting the Phantasy Star Wiki. I will provide a link in the description. With that out of the way, let us jump right into the history of PSO2TCG. PSO2TCG was announced on December 1, 2017. It was announced as a card game you could play traditionally in 1v1 battles, as well as co-op battles in which you, and up to 2 other friends, can pin their decks against boss enemies from the titular online RPG. The game was produced in-house by SEGA's card game division, who had many other TCGs under their belt. This will be important later. In a 2018 New Year's greeting post, Mr. Sakai stated that the PSO2 dev team wasn't directly involved in the development of the card game, instead taking a more supervising role on the project. The first time anyone could get their hands onto the card game was on December 9, 2017. Card stores around the country would host a demo event, in which players could test the game. Instead of real finalized cards, you would be playing with template cards, while under supervision of SEGA staff members. These template cards used in-game renders of characters as placeholders, since the artwork wasn't finalized yet. And to be honest, when I first saw these I was very turned off. I get the idea about the demo event, it's really cool, but it is not a good first impression of your card game to use art like this, no matter if you say it's going to be replaced later. A cool collectible also needs to look cool, and this preview wasn't really doing it for me. I will be making comparisons to Digimon TCG throughout the video, by the way. It is the primary TCG I personally play, and was around for its history to draw comparisons with. So anyway, the demo event comes and goes, SEGA gathered some valuable feedback, and went back to the kitchen to keep cooking. And cooking they did, because by the end of February 2018, they were closing in on the release date. To hype up the game, they began sharing finalized artwork for the cards, and it was a massive glow up. Instead of a dorky-ass in-game render of a fin, we were now treated to cards that looked like this. Much more pleasant to look at. So, it came time for the official launch on March 22nd. SEGA advertised the game on PSO2 Station, and people were excited. By the way, for those of you who don't know, PSO2 Station was NGS headline back when it had a soul. Anyway, let's go to the store and grab a starter deck and... Hold up. Where are the starter decks? They only released a booster pack without starter decks.
Are you crazy? Are you out of your mind?
Oh wow, and I thought NGS had an incomplete launch. For some reason SEGA thought it'd be a wise move to sell the boosters first, at 5,000 yen a box by the way, and then sell the starter decks a month later. God, this is so stupid. By the way, in order to play the game, your deck needs a player card, a mag card, and the amount of cards that is written on your player card's HP. Since the main win condition in this game is to deck out your opponent. Without going too much into detail about card distribution, it was very unlikely to build 2 full decks by using just 1 booster box. There was only 1 mag card in that entire set, and you needed 2 of them, but on average you'd only get 1 per box. This resulted in a lot of gameplay early on, during the hype period of this TCG, having to ignore the rules about mag cards, because players didn't draw enough of them to equip every player. A fully avoidable issue had they released the starter decks first. Also, who releases a booster before any starter deck? Starter decks are vital to get people on board with your card game. DTCG released the starter decks first, and the global release was simultaneous for its booster and starter decks. Because that's what makes sense. Anyway, I rambled enough about that. One cool thing about this card game was that SEGA encouraged you to print custom player cards. Their website provided you with frames of already existing player cards. Simply edit a screenshot of your character into the frame and voila. This right here is a perfectly legal card you can play with. The first set focused largely on Hunter, Ranger and Force cards, but there were units representing the other classes in there as well. A month later, the starter decks for Hunter, Ranger, and Force finally came out. They cost 1,400 yen each, and came with 2 booster packs to sweeten the deal. You'd think from here on out it would be smooth sailing, right? Well, it turns out the Ranger deck is illegal. You see, in PSO2TCG you have a thing called drop cards. Those are cards with this icon right here. You can only have 9 of those in your deck. However, due to a misprint, the Ranger starter deck came with 12 of them. It took SEGA nearly 2 weeks to publicly acknowledge and apologize for the issue. Maybe the Profound Darkness just didn't want this game to have a smooth launch. But at the very least, you could swap out the 3 misprinted cards with cards from the 2 booster packs, so the situation wasn't a complete disaster. Anyway, alongside the starter decks, SEGA released the limited edition bundle that had all 3 of the starter decks, a fancy playmat, and a card storage box. It also came with an item code that gave you TCG memories in-game, with which you could get an exclusive lobby action and personal quarters items. This item code didn't come with any other product, so they clearly wanted you to buy the decks in bulk rather than separately. A theme that you might see more of later. The TCG finally properly came out, and now all SEGA has to do is to continue the hype and we immediately entered a content drought. Man, this game is really good at copying the mechanics of PSO2, it even copied the content droughts. Now, this period wasn't completely dry. On the website, you could download boss decks to print out and play in co-op raid battles. These were released monthly, and were very low effort. They used in-game renders of the enemies, so they looked really boring, but hey, at least it's content, I guess. But like, look at this Vol Dragon card. And now look at this one. Which one goes harder? In June there was an official meetup event held by SEGA that saw a decent success. Nothing to write home about, but, you know, could be worse. Then, on 30th of August, we finally got the second booster set. This set introduced player characters for Fighter, Gunner, and Tector. So it was finally possible to play these classes. On a side note, 2018 was during episode 5, so we had 10 classes in-game already. PSO2TCG released cards in the same order as the in-game episodes. So, we wouldn't get a Braver expansion until episode 2 next year. This is probably one of these areas where they should have maybe sped up class releases a little, but I don't think anyone at SEGA could predict the future, so I won't blame them for it. Long story short, if you wanted to play Bouncer, Summoner, Hero, Phantom, Etwall, or Luster, you were just fresh out of luck. Surprisingly, you didn't have to wait long for the next booster set, as it came out on November 22nd. It introduced new black-colored cards themed around Dark Falls Elder. If you wanted to play a Falls Spawn-themed deck, you could finally do so. By the third set, the TCG was finally shaping up to be something rather cool and unique. It translated game mechanics really well, all things considered, and the plethora of weapons, skills, armor, and characters from PSO2 lend itself really well to create an endless amount of cards. But funnily enough, they did not implement the weapon element mechanics at all. I guess we'll have to see how Line Strike does it. Shortly after the release of the third set, SEGA held a PSO2TCG-themed broadcast, which focused on explaining the game rules, having a few casual games between the hosts, and teased the upcoming second limited edition bundle. You know, kinda how DTCG did, but just once instead of on a regular basis. The second limited edition set focused on co-op raid battles, and came with this monstrosity. A Dark Falls raid PDF wasn't made available for download because they wanted to make it special, and my god they did. Surely Dark Falls Luther will be as sick as this, right? This is foreshadowing. By the way, funny side note, but you could theoretically fight the Dark Falls Elder raid with a group of Dark Falls Elder themed decks. Trust no one, not even yourself. Anyway, where were we? This second special edition came with all 3 starter decks again, which most players already had at this point, but it was also the only way to get these cool in-game items. This bundle was like 8,800 yen, so people could have really done without the starter decks bloating the price. This was the most expensive PSO2 TCG product ever. What a way to close off the year. To start off 2019, SEGA released the Legends Pack. It came out on February 22nd, and featured cards from across the franchise. Phantasy Star Online, Universe, Portable, Zero, Nova, and PSO2 were all represented here. If that wasn't enough, we also have characters from PSO2 Episode 3, 4, and 5. It's a little bit awkward in retrospect. Katori was in the TCG, but Saga wasn't. Harriet was in the TCG, but Shiva wasn't. Check out this sick mother card though! To celebrate the first anniversary of the card game, SEGA released an art book on March 11th. This is where I'd like to talk about the art a little bit. As you likely saw throughout the video, it's some really good art. According to a tweet from the official PSO2TCG account, the art is made by a mix of new and veteran artists, who previously worked on PSO Episode 3 Card Revolution. And if you played PSO2 you'll recognize that a lot of the artists that work on that game's weaponoid chips also worked on art for the TCG. The art is honestly the biggest legacy this TCG left behind. So, I hope that if Line Strike does well, SEGA will be incentivized to continue releasing new cards, rather than stopping at those that have already come out. PSO2 TCG stopped at Episode 2 content, so it would be really weird if Line Strike did so as well, simply because they never made more cards for PSO2 TCG. On April 20th, 3 new starter decks came out. This time centered around Fighter, Gunner, and Tector. And yes, this is the official spelling of Tector since 2019. It was not something the localizers of PSO2 Global came up with. It's official. Compared to the first 3 starter decks, these were a much better bang for your buck. They still sold at 1,400 yen but came with 3 booster packs as opposed to just 2. Wait, a Tector starter deck? Maybe it has a Tector mag. No, it doesn't. Don't you worry, this running gag will continue. Overall, PSO2 TCG's second year saw much more involvement from SEGA to host official events and tournaments. However, they were hosted in SEGA headquarters in Tokyo, which meant that you were kinda excluded if you lived outside the city. And this is another issue that plagued this card game. You kinda had to be in Tokyo to really experience this game. And keep in mind this was before the unknown virus of unspecified origin, so webcam duels weren't really that normalized yet. The Episode 2 era of the TCG would finally kickstart on June 8th, with the release of the Volume 2-1 set. By this point in time, SEGA wanted you to buy booster boxes in full, as opposed to just singular booster packs. In a bizarre move, the Braver starter deck was bundled in with a Volume 2-1 box release. You would also get one of 3 different sets of sleeves in your box. I'm not really a fan of that. Like, I get the sleeves. But a starter deck? You're gonna have so many duplicates of these cards when buying multiple boxes. Fortunately, you didn't have to wait long for the second Episode 2 set, since Volume 2-2 came out on July 27th. These 2 sets focused on Braver player cards, one focusing on Katana, the other focusing on bullet bows. There were new class-specific mag cards, Council of the Six cards, and Black Luther cards. Yes, they essentially covered the entirety of Episode 2 in 2 back-to-back booster sets. Which is both cool and awful at the same time, because you have this burst of content in summer, but absolutely nothing in fall. I really don't know what they were thinking with this release schedule. But surely, the 3rd limited edition will give us an amazing Luther raid battle, right? Sadly, Luther had just a boring PDF on the website, and that was it for him. The 3rd limited edition set never came out. Interestingly enough, they made raid battles for mining-based defense. You know, when I see things like that, I just wonder if it wasn't better if this game simply came out as a pen and paper RPG. Anyway, the last booster set of 2019 released on December 21st, and was themed around cards from the PSO2 episode Oracle anime. But just the Episode 1 portion of the anime. I assume they had plans for more anime-themed sets later but, well, this set wouldn't be just the final set of the year, it would be the final set of PSO2 TCG ever. On December 24th, the first signs of Episode 3 were showing up. SEGA released the raid battle for Giger Gunnagum. That's an Episode 3 boss, so Episode 3 was definitely coming, right? On the 28th of January, they released another Episode 3 boss. Surely, episode 3 is just around the corner, right? Well, just 3 days later, on January 31st, the PSO2TCG Twitter account announced the discontinuation of the card game. This came as a shock to many players, because everyone was under the impression that the game had been steadily growing, and would surely continue. However, if you were following the other SEGA TCGs around that time, they were also discontinued almost on the same day even. This didn't make any sense. Some people blame the discontinuation of the card games on the recent restructuring within SEGA. On December 24th, it was reported that SEGA would merge its arcade gaming division back into the main branch of SEGA, in order to focus more on the global market rather than local arcade dominance. And I suppose their local TCGs were caught in the crossfire. The reason for that closure was definitely not the unnamed virus of unspecified origin. This card game was discontinued before all of that started, and DTCG thrived in 2020. This unfortunately means that PSO2TCG ended early. But before the card game wrapped up, SEGA released one final raid boss. The super raid battle that will test your limits. The battle against Demon Fall Leg. It unfortunately still used in-game renders, but was an okay send-off, considering how iconic this battle is in-game. However, people couldn't shake off the feeling like the game ended on a weak punch. It wasn't taking the world by storm, but people expected it to at least cover the first 3 episodes of the video game. After all, we have been getting episode 3 boss battles already. Despite all of its shortcomings, the TCG fostered a pretty nice following. It was surprisingly well balanced despite focusing primarily on fun raid battles, rather than competitive tournaments. Do I think they could have done things better, and grown the game faster? Absolutely. If I may compare it to Digimon TCG again, Digimon has also had a demo event, but it used finished cards instead of placeholder ones. You could try the trial decks via a tutorial app, which was later upgraded to feature 2 full decks. They had a YouTube channel, where a few hosts would regularly play various decks against each other, and tease new cards from an upcoming booster set. Booster sets came out regularly, so there was always something new to look forward to, and card shops were supported to host local webcam tournaments, as well as some official events with really sick price cards. After being exclusive to Japan for about a year, they released the TCG internationally to a very warm reception. These days, there is even a webcomic about the TCG. Basically Yu-Gi-Oh! But for people who can read. It's actually pretty good. In comparison, PSO2TCG felt like an afterthought. It was plagued with launch issues, content droughts, ugly raid cards, and barely any advertising. According to Mr. Kimura, Line Strike started its development sometime around 2020, so it wouldn't surprise me if the PSO2 devs also felt very disheartened by the TCG's discontinuation. I guess the fact that all these artworks can live on an NGS means that there is some silver lining to this story. At least we didn't have to deal with PSO2's item lab in the card game, right? Could you imagine if Dudu was in the TCG?
何をかね
Wait!
失敗じゃないかな
What was that?
失敗じゃないかな
No! Not the Dudu TCG raid boss!
また来たまえ
As always, a huge shout out to my wonderful channel members for supporting my videos. And another big shout out to RoboArcs for making my research on this topic so much simpler. For the rest of this video, I will be showing a slideshow of PSO2 TCG artworks I found on the internet for you to enjoy. I hope you have a wonderful day and I'll see you in the next one. Take care!